Welcome to the Parent Matters podcast, where we help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of parenting and equip you with tools to confidently parent your children. I'm Susan Stutzman, and today we're talking about child development with Leonor Stjepic. Leonor is an award-winning social entrepreneur, CEO, and mentor. Leonor's first part of her career was spent in the private sector, in several senior managerial roles and running her own consultancy. In 1994, Leonor decided to volunteer to work with children and women who were victims of the war in the Balkans. Coming back to London, Leonor started working with UK NGO Fields in Trust and then for Index on Censorship before becoming the first CEO of the Galapagos Conservation Trust. Her next CEO role was as Chief Executive of Medical Research Institute, RAFT, and during her time at RAFT, Leonor created a life science company, Smart Matrix Limited, and was its CEO for 5 years while concurrently serving as CEO of RAFT. In June 2018, Leonor took up her fourth CEO role as Chief Executive of Montessori Group, which boasts many things, including a large network providing resources galore for parents and caregivers. And I'm delighted to have her here with her wealth of experience in life as well as in child development. So welcome to the shore, Leonor.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. It's a delight. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, before we get started, can you share with our listeners just a little bit about your current role with the Montessori Group and how you are working with the Montessori Group to just advance things that you're passionate about, children and parents?
Yes, absolutely. So it's really interesting. We had a board meeting this morning, and we talked about our activities for next year. And one of my board members, who has been a Montessorian for 30 years, actually said, "We are doing absolutely what Maria Montessori would have wanted us to do. We are where she started, which is all about social impact. It's all about helping those most disadvantaged, helping children really fulfill their potential. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do that by both promoting Montessori, but also by having a teacher training college, by doing other training courses, through quality assurance. You've talked about the free resources for families, talking to government. We do it in a whole variety of ways, running independent sort of projects, but also projects with collaborators, such as the Jane Goodall Institute. So everything we do has a social impact at heart. And we do a whole range of activities and also consultancy and really just try and get the message out there that this is really important, that early years is really important, child development is really important, and we need to, as a society, as governments, as policymakers, invest much more in supporting our youngest children.
Yeah. Wonderful. So for our listeners who are mainly parents, or caregivers, can you just explain, I know not all of them are familiar with the Montessori method, but can you just give us some brief highlights about Maria Montessori's, her desire and then the mission of Montessori around the world?
Sure. Well, I mean, Maria Montessori was a doctor, and that's really important because it means that everything that she developed was actually based on scientific observation. And it's interesting that modern science with MRIs and neuroscience and the technology that we have, we now see that the things that she talked about in terms of child development are actually absolutely correct. So what she, and what's interesting is that in many parts of the world, many schools have actually adopted Montessori without realizing it's Montessori, because the principles are very common sense, they're very simple. And it's really about what we call being child-centered. That means, looking at each child as an individual, looking at each child as a unique human being, and supporting that child to become to achieve its full potential. And we do that by giving the child the freedom to choose what to do within a framework. We talk about freedom within a framework. It's not just a free-for-all. Children don't just run around doing, there is a framework. That framework provides stability. It provides safety for the child. But within that framework, a child can choose what activities it wants to do. And then and how long it wants to do the activities for. And when that child has then finished those activities, it puts the activity back where it belongs, where it was before. And that's really important, because that teaches respect, that teaches an understanding that everything has its place. It creates it creates that children do like routine, so it creates a routine. And what we've seen is, children learn far better because they're able to take the time they need to take to do an activity. So I'll give you an example. If we have a maths activity, there may be a child that does it in 10 minutes. And there may be a child that takes 2 hours. And if you sort of say to a child that is going to get it in 10 minutes, no, you have to do an hour of maths, that child is going to be bored for 50 minutes. And that child's going to act out. Whilst a child that, may take 2 hours to do the maths activity, if you say after an hour, that's it, that's the end of it, they won't have learnt it. And then they feel that, I'm not good at maths, or it's not something I enjoy doing. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just that we haven't given that child the time to actually work out the problem for themselves. So it's very much around sort of observing the child. What Montessori believed was that education is a pyramid. It's the child, the school, and the parent or the family. And therefore, all the Montessori activities are things that actually can be replicated at home, in the family home. So it's all very, you don't have to have all the materials at the home. It could be something as simple as, why not put your children's toys or activities on a shelf where they can reach it and take it down for themselves. Sort of encourage your child to take part in doing things around the house, setting the table, dressing themselves, washing their own hands. You have to give them a bit more time, but that actually encourages the child to become independent. They grow in self-esteem. It helps with motor skills. So even very simple activities that can be done within the home are actually helping that child develop.
Wow. Well, thanks for laying that out. I really appreciate the Montessori principles, and in looking at children as worthy beings and being able to accomplish things just based on who they are. But I love how you so eloquently depicted it, right? There's freedom within a framework. And I think that for our listeners, especially for parents and caregivers, child development is really important. And yet sometimes we focus on the framework and getting tasks done more than the child's ability or the way in which they best can achieve getting the task done. So can you talk to us a little bit about how parents can cultivate that, and how that and why you see, like, through research that freedom within a framework is important for early childhood development?
Yeah, I think what happens is that, and I think this has grown over the decades. As parents, we've become a little bit afraid of trusting our children to do things. And it's quite interesting. One of the things that often we get sort of, have parents who come to look at a Montessori classroom and are, had no exposure to it before, they'll go, oh my God, you've got glass and you've got scissors and you've got knives and forks. And the sort of fear that somehow because those things are in a classroom, a child is going to hurt themselves. And that's not the case. It's not the case because, children have been using scissors and glasses and knives and forks in Montessori classrooms for 100 years. If they'd all been sort of dying, we would have known about it. So that's not the case. Mm-hmm. I think we have to learn to trust the child. We have to, and that's why the framework's important. You give it a framework and you trust the child, and that can be quite scary for parents, and we appreciate that. So part of the work that we do is about helping parents do activities that help build that trust. So that's it, that's part of it. I think it's really important for children because they learn that independence, they learn creativity, they learn how to solve problems for themselves, and these are all the skills that we're going to need for the future. In the digital age, and this isn't just me, World Bank, OECD, McKinsey's, all sorts of people have said that the digital future means that the workforce of the future are going to need the skills of these soft emotional skills that sometimes we talk about them as if they're not important. But these social emotional learning are the skill set that children today are going to need when they're adults. So it's a really important sort of set of skills for children to learn. And Montessori is really good at that because we give the child the freedom to fail. We give the child the freedom to do something in a different way, and that's about sort of sparking creativity. And I'll give you an example of something, how it really hit home for me. So when I first became CEO, in fact, before I joined, I went to visit some nurseries because I wasn't a Montessorian and I wanted to learn more about it and I wanted to understand. And I was in a nursery, and in Montessori, the children take their own coats off and they hang them up on a peg. And there was a little boy who was too short to hang his coat up on the peg. And my instinct was to go and help or take the coat. And the teacher said, no, wait. And so I waited, and she was next to me. And that child went off, found a wooden box, brought the wooden box, put it down, climbed on it, put the coat on the peg, and was so pleased with himself. You could just see this child was beaming because he had actually solved the problem for himself. And he'd been quite creative about it. He'd solved the problem for himself. And that was just a sort of tiny example of how, you can develop these sort of self-confidence, that ability to think sort of differently in a way that is actually quite a simple way. You also learnt motor skills, by the way, because he learned to pick up the box, put it down. So it's a sort of a whole thing that goes with learning that from a very simple action. And I think that's one of the things that Montessori is particularly strong on.
Yeah, I think as a parent myself, sometimes I can get in this race of feeling like my children need to get these test scores or they need to do this or that to be on par with their peers. And yet I know that it can be not only wonderful, right? They can be children are so pleased with themselves when they're able to figure it out. But it takes a lot of patience for a parent, and
it does. And I agree. It does take a lot of patience.
And I think that.
And
go ahead.
Well, but there are things that can be done to help. So, for example, one of the pushbacks we get from parents is, yes, but we don't. We're trying to get the children out to go to school, and we haven't got time to wait for them to do their own shoelaces up or do their own coat up or something. So within the Montessori classroom we actually have little frames with zips and zippers and buttons and hooks and laces and stuff. So and that's something that you can make into a game. So you can sort of get your child to practice doing shoelaces or practice doing buttons. I mean, the children love it. So when the time comes that actually you're waiting for them to do it, by that time they've practiced it, so it's much easier. So they're not learning for the first time in a stressful environment where it's, oh, come on, we've got to get into the car and go off to school. So there are things that it's, there are little, things that parents caregivers can do just to kind of ease that part of it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Little bits at a time. I know too, Leonor, one of the things that I've seen talking about this freedom within a framework, especially with COVID, and I wonder if you can, and the, COVID-19 pandemic, and I hope that you can talk a little bit about this as well, is that there have been some positive as well as negative effects based on the freedom that children have had, sometimes too much freedom or too much framework. And as this pandemic is, there's things that are, lifting, but there are also still restrictions and a lot of unknowns. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you would recommend, especially with the schools starting up again in a few weeks, and children being, like you said, needing that social emotional aspect to be able to develop holistically, and yet some parents do not have the luxury of not being able to go to work and they have to have their children on a tablet or on a screen for large periods of the day due to their school needs or where they are in the world. Yeah.
I mean, a very big issue. And yes, whilst there have been some positives in that, research that we've done with families have shown that actually parents have enjoyed having their children around. And, when they've been working from home, there is a little bit of time saved in commuting sometimes, which can be used, spent with children. And that's been, quite a positive. And they've discovered things about their children. That's a positive, but we are only beginning to see the impact of the pandemic in terms of we've been so I think focused on the physical damage of the pandemic that we've not really started to think about the emotional and social damage of the pandemic. And if you think about it, if you've got a 3-year-old, for 2/3 of that child's life, he or she has been used to seeing people in masks, where you haven't been able to see their whole face. They may not have had interaction with other children, particularly if they don't have siblings. We've had cases reported to us of children being out on the street with their parents, going shopping, something that's allowed, or going out when it's allowed, running to see one of their friends because they've seen one of their friends hugging them and being shouted at in the street, which is quite traumatic. We've been hearing about particularly young children who start screaming when someone, when a grandparent or someone comes to hug them because they don't recognize that person anymore, or they're not used to being touched by someone else other than those in the immediate home. I mean, those are very important sort of issues that will have an impact on a child. We are doing a lot of work on this, and in fact, anyone that signs up to our free Montessori network, part of our current series of newsletters, and they are also on our archives, is about what we call school readiness, and it's exactly about that. It's about what can parents do to support children who are going to go back to school, and it really is working with them through play, doing activities. So trying to think about activities that sort of make things less scary, how you have conversations around them, perhaps walk with the child to the school, or drive the child to the school, and just show the school, even when it's closed, say this is where you'll be coming, and explain things to the child, explain this is how you're going to do things. Think about what it feels like if your child hasn't seen someone, without a mask, if it hasn't seen a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, perhaps show a photo of them, and say, this is, this is your grandma, this is your grandpa, or something, sort of to start kind of getting them used to things, but really just, sort of allowing them to do activities through play that will help them build that kind of social emotional learning is really important. More important almost than it would have been 2 or 3 years ago, because it's that resilience, that independence, that confidence that's going to get these children through when they have to face a school that in some cases may still have a lot of protocols.
Yeah.
So it may not be the same as it was, in the last time they went or whatever. I know they're lifting a lot of restrictions in some countries, but they're not in all countries, and some restrictions still remain.
Yeah.
With regards to technology, we are not anti-technology. We are saying that, it's about helping children understand that this is a tool.
Yeah.
So I think it is incumbent upon parents to become a little bit more savvy about technology and safety. I was having a conversation with a couple of mothers recently about this, and they said, well, my children know how to access things that I don't know how to access, and they know how to override the parental controls. Well, then you need to think about strengthening those parental controls, and or having them there in the first place.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, children can then be exposed to some really, horrible things. I mean, the internet can be a very positive thing, but sometimes they can be exposed to very horrible things.
Yeah.
And things like just make sure all pop-ups are sort of disabled, for example.
Yeah.
I even I've had this where I've opened up my laptop and I've typed in something in Google or another search engine, and suddenly I'm getting all these pop-ups going, whoa, where where did that come from? And I'm not sure I want that on my screen, So I've had to quickly go and check my firewall and stuff like that. So it is important.
Yeah.
And whilst your child, you may not have the time to spend with your child constantly. Again, if you give your child activities and allow them just to get on with the activities, you don't have to be supervising your child 100% of the time. And that's what we talked about, that framework as a place of safety. If your child's got their mat or their desk or their place, where they play, and they're given access to some activities, children will often go off and, do these things by themselves because they have a curiosity. They want to go off and do other things. And something that's interactive and they can kind of handle is actually often more interesting than something that's just being looked at. So there are ways of doing that.
I think of, as you're talking about this, I just can't help but think of sometimes when I work with parents or guardians of children, I talk a lot about making a framework through like a calendar or a timeline so that children can know what to expect. But it doesn't mean that you have to, plan out every single moment or have it, down to a T. And I think about how this fits nicely in what you're talking about freedom within a framework, so that children know. And I know another thing that I love to use is visual timers. I have a few in my office that they show with a color, like when the time counts down, so a child knows. If we have this framework that I'm going to work for an hour and you get to be on your mat or in your seat, doing school, it doesn't mean that you have to do, like you said, the math for the whole hour, but you need to stay in this area. So here's the framework, but then you have these 5 things that you can do as well if you, are finished with your math or what have you. Yeah.
Well, we in classrooms, in Montessori classrooms, we give children a mat, and that works really, really well, because a child that becomes their mat. It's their space. They feel in control of that space, and that's really good for the child. But also, it can be moved around. So if they're bored of sitting in one place, they can actually sort of move the mat somewhere else. But it's their space, and it's contained, and it gives them that sort of safety. And it doesn't have to be a mat, it can be a towel on the floor or something. It doesn't have to be something terribly expensive. But I think it just gives the child its own space, control, as you say, it's control of its own space. And you say, and you can say, look, yes, I need to do this, and whilst I'm doing this, you're going to be there, and you're going to be working. You're going to be doing your work, because Maria Montessori talked about children's play as their work. So it can be mom's working, or I'm working, and you're going to do your work, and this is your work. And children like to feel that they're doing something and that they're important. I mean, we have even things like cleaning. One of my nieces, who's now an adult, she went to Montessori school, and I remember her mother telling me she used to love cleaning the same window over and over and over again, and she'd spend hours now it was great for her, because what she was doing, she was learning concentration, she was learning motor skills, so it wasn't about cleaning the window, it was about an activity. But she felt really proud that she was doing something to in the house, that made her feel grown up. And so there's things like that can be done without it needing to, that will engross children for a very long time.
Yeah, it's not about it's not about having them vacuum or sweep the floor and getting it perfect. It's about them learning to participate, to cooperate, to be a vital member of your family or your community, but also give them these large, gross motor skills, teaching them about responsibility. I mean, there's so many benefits. So many benefits.
So many benefits.
I appreciate one thing. I will.
Yeah. Go. Sorry, please.
I was just gonna say that when I was a kid, I remember my mother having us do many tasks, and I'm sure they weren't perfect, but I appreciate that one thing that she always said was, why give you something fake when you can learn with the real thing? And I think that part of it had to do with, that we lived in a smaller home, and we didn't have as many toys. There were more children than toys, I think. But I think, it was a lovely thing to be able to create and have fun, but also be learning at the same time, because all children want to be like moms and dads. I know, my children will set up something and pretend they're on a computer if I'm working on a computer.
They do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so if you give them something real that makes them feel, oh, look, I've achieved this, even better. And as you say, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're not going to tell them off or scold them if they haven't got it perfect. But it doesn't matter if they haven't got it perfect. It's the fact that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And they're feeling, and it makes them feel valued. They're a valued part of that family then. Mm.
So I know you mentioned the Montessori group network, and I was hoping that we could take a quick break from this conversation before we finish, that you could just tell our listeners about the different resources that you have. I know as I was looking around it, there's so many. So I'd love for you to give us some highlights and share with our listeners what's on that network.
Yeah, so we do. So for anyone who actually signs up for the network, you get a very short newsletter that normally has a sort of, not a very lengthy, but a sort of substantial article on a particular theme of what people are being worried about. And so we listen to what parents are saying to us. This is my concern at the moment. So as I said, at the moment it's about school readiness. We're actually doing one every week around school readiness and different aspects of school readiness. We have free online courses, short courses for parents that, and it's not all about Montessori. We're not, we're not trying to sort of convert everybody to Montessori.
Right.
What we're saying is this is something that's supportive for families.
Yeah.
So we've had courses on, bringing a sibling home from the hospital. how do you deal with sibling jealousy? We've had courses on, what to do if your child's a fussy eater. And we've also got activity sheets. We've got free ebooks. We have access to webinars. So we're not doing new webinars until September. We're taking a bit of a break over the summer, but there is an archive of webinars that anyone can just download and listen to. We'll be doing a podcast as well, which is very parent focused. That'll be in later next year.
Wonderful.
So there's a whole range of things, and obviously, and we also then have we'll be introducing other sort of support things that we will be thinking of. So, for example, discount codes for certain things in the future as well, which will be global. So you can buy online. So if you particularly want to buy a particular book or something, we might be able to have some discount codes of things like that. So we're looking at a whole range. We're going to expand it even more, but there's already a huge amount there, and we designed it particularly with families in mind, and actually by listening to families and saying to parents, what is it that you need from us? What is it that we can do to help? And obviously during the pandemic, we've been doing a lot around the pandemic, and how do you work from home if you've got your children there and stuff like that. So
a fantastic resource. And if anybody's interested, there will be a link in the show notes below to this web address. But just so you can hear it, it's montessoritraining.org.uk/network/. Is that correct?
yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And that link is in the show notes. So many resources. I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is so great. And again, like you said, it's not just for people that have their children enrolled in Montessori school or thinking about that. They're helpful resources for any parent, especially understanding a child's development in their brain, in their body, how to give them that freedom within a framework. And I just want to say for all of our listeners that when your podcast comes out, they should sign up.
Thank you so much.
What's it going to be called?
We haven't decided.
Okay.
Yet. We haven't decided yet, but we will let you know. But the other thing I just want to stress is all the activities that we have in our activity sheets. We have designed them specifically that it can be done by anyone, regardless of where they live. So you don't, if, for example, some of the stuff we have around outdoor activities, we understand that not everybody has access to the outdoors. So it's about how do you bring the outdoors inside. So we've really been very mindful that, not everyone's on the same economic level. Not everybody's got the same access to things that some of us have more access to, and we wanted to design activities that could be done by anybody, regardless of who they were or where they lived or what their economic background was.
That's great. So, Leonor, now that people know how to find out more about you and about your resources, I wonder if you could just share, before they get to that website, maybe something that you would encourage parents to help children to process the thought of going back to school, like you mentioned, you've been doing a lot of work on. And what can parents do to help children integrate and maybe even mitigate any of the negative effects? Because I know there have been some, especially like you mentioned earlier on social emotional development as a result of this crisis. And how can parents, like one or two ways that they can begin to intentionally help their child as they prepare to go back to school?
Okay, well, let me give you kind of three tips, as it were, for the listeners. I would say that the first tip is talk to your child, and it's okay to acknowledge that this is a scary time. And it's okay to acknowledge that actually sometimes it can be scary for adults too.
Yeah.
because I think that validating those feelings that children may have of feeling fearful is important. That it's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel anxious. That's normal. And that you're there to help them with those feelings, but not to sort of, don't tell them, oh, you're being silly, or it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I think it's important to validate those feelings and acknowledge and talk about them openly, so that the child can feel confident about coming to the parent and talking about those feelings.
Yeah.
The second tip I would do is try and think about how can you get your child to mix more socially. Obviously, in some places there's still restrictions, but even within the restrictions, think about how can you sort of start to build up those social connections. And it may be just take a walk with your child and, say hello to the neighbour or something, so that child begins to see that it's okay to interact socially with others. So I think that's important. And the third thing is, yes, try and sort of get your child doing things that it would sort of into a routine that it would have when it goes to school. So as I sort of talked about before, do some sort of games around, doing your shoelaces up, putting your coat on, getting yourself dressed, washing your hands. So even before the child goes to school, it's already got a sense of, when I go to school, this will be my routine. This is what I will do. And this is something I can do. Look, I can, put my coat on and take my coat off by myself. I can hang it up. I can, do my shoes up. I can go and wash my hands. So I know how to pack my bag. Things that a child then, feels a sense of confidence. They're not going, it's not, everything isn't new. So it doesn't have to be, sort of make it a sort of an onerous thing, but just a fun thing, every day, a little bit, just to get that child confident about, I understand what the routine will be when I go back to school.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I know I have little ones that are going back to school, and last year we were fortunate and were able to go back half day, even with the restrictions. And I will say that helping them develop a routine where they got their backpack ready in the evening helped reduce anxiety so much. Just because, there were so many restrictions of you have to sit 3 feet apart and you have to bring your own certain things each day, because it wasn't like you could share with your neighbor because of all of the restrictions. And even in that, in helping them in that routine, I saw a lot of reduced anxiety where if we forgot, it was like frantic in the morning. Mom, did you do this? Did you do this?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it gives them an element of control over a situation where none of us have had control over so long. So I think that's important. That, and again, it's that sort of sense of, I have a framework. I understand what this is, and I'm in control of that. What happens within that. It just builds confidence, makes it less scary.
Yeah, it does. So I'm curious if there is, as we are kind of wrapping up this podcast, I know that you have your fingers in a lot of work around the world, and I'm just curious, what are you passionate about right now, and what are ways that, again, social emotionally we can develop empathic responses for children who are all over the world, and in teaching our children things that are going on, and how other children are responding to this global pandemic, and also ways in which that they can support children their own age.
Yeah. Well, we do. We work in 70 countries around the world. What I'm very passionate about I think now more than ever is about giving children an opportunity to learn. And that sounds very glib, and you think, well, of course, doesn't every child? No, every child doesn't. There are millions of children who don't have access to schools or education, or aren't in a situation where their parents can support them with their learning either. And so I think it's really important, really, really important. I'm the first woman in my family to have a career, and it's because of education. I am a living example of what education does. My family were a family of refugees. We had nothing. And the fact that I am where I am is really down to the fact that the one thing my parents were able to do, one thing my family were able to do, was create a situation for us where I and my cousins had education. So I'm very passionate about that. That's what drives me the whole time. I think it's important that children who are in a fortunate situation, or in a more fortunate situation than others, I think it's important that we teach those children that we're part of a big world. And we cannot shut ourselves off as much. And the pandemic has taught us that, if nothing else. It's taught us that you can't just go, oh, okay, well, because I live here and it's one of the G7 countries, it's not going to affect me. It's affected all of us. So I think thinking about activities, and we have some of these on our network, thinking about activities with your child that helps them understand that they're part of a bigger world. And sometimes that can be as simple as giving your child something to grow in a pot or in the garden, because then what the child sort of starts to understand that there is a world that's bigger than itself or its own environment. With older children, there are activities that can be done about, sort of solidarity with other organisations, charitable work, philanthropic work. But I think it starts with that empathy is, if you give a child a sense of actually, there's something outside of itself. There's a big world out there, and that can be done through simple. If you've got a pet, having pets is great. That's why most Montessori classrooms have a pet, because again, it's sort of the child's having to think about it's having to learn. It has to develop its empathetic skills. If you've got a pet, you've got to think about the pet. You've got to look after it, and if you've got a pet, encourage your child to sort of take care of it as well with you. If it's I noticed this with I noticed it with my nephews and nieces, but now with my great nephews and nieces that are very, very small, because they love just if they come into the house and we say, do you want to feed the dog, and put the bowl down. Now they're 3 and 4, they do tend to spill most of it on the floor, and it doesn't matter, the dogs still eat it. But it sort of makes them think about something else. So I think it's really, we can start with small things, but it's really important that we start to help children understand that yes, the world is a big place. And in Montessori's time, they talked about it as cosmic education, because that was the language of the day. We talk more about respect, and respect for the world, respect for others, respect for yourself. So I think it's important that we do teach our children those skills, because as we've seen quite in the last couple of years, we, as much as we'd like to think that we live in bubbles, we don't really.
It's true. Well, this has been such a helpful and enlightening conversation, and I am so thankful that we got to have this conversation. And to all of the listeners, please make sure that you check out Leonor's Montessori Group Network. The link is in the show notes below, as well as a link for an article on a longitudinal study on preschool, Montessori preschool, and how it can elevate and equalize child outcomes through its work. And if you found this podcast helpful, this conversation useful, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and join me the next time on the Parent Matters podcast, because Parenting is tough, and we encourage you not to parent alone. Please remember the topics discussed in this podcast should be considered a matter of personal opinion. They do not reflect professional advice. If you or your child is in need of mental health counseling support, please search out a licensed counselor in your area.